My name is Olivia, and I am 42 years old. I will never forget the moment when my sister stood up at my daughter's wedding, holding a cream envelope, and tried to humiliate me in front of 200 guests. 15 years of subtle digs, whispered insults, and public comparisons all built up to that single moment. What she did not know was that the truth was waiting at the door, ready to silence her forever. Have you ever felt the sting of being underestimated by your own family? It cuts deeper than any criticism from strangers because it comes wrapped in the voice of someone who should have been your protector. My sister Victoria spent years reminding me that I had wasted my MBA by marrying a farmer. She carried herself as the golden child, the one who had escaped small-town Oregon and made it in the city. For more than a decade, she looked at me not as an equal, but as a cautionary tale. It began innocently enough, the way family rivalries always do. At Christmas gatherings, she would raise a glass of wine and say, "Olivia could have been in New York or San Francisco, but she chose carrots." The room would chuckle nervously, unsure whether to laugh or cringe. On Thanksgiving, she would announce million-dollar campaigns at her firm, then glance in my direction and ask, "Still selling lettuce at the market?" Every word was dipped in sugar but designed to wound. I thought I had learned to ignore it. I convinced myself that silence was dignity, that biting my tongue was the mature response. My husband, David, told me often, "Success does not need to announce itself." I believed him, but deep down I wondered how long Emma, our daughter, could withstand the constant comparisons. Teenagers absorb more than they show. Emma began calling her father an agricultural manager instead of proudly saying he was a farmer. That broke me more than any insult Victoria could throw. On the morning of Emma's wedding, Victoria arrived in a gleaming Tesla, stepping out in a designer dress that probably cost more than our monthly mortgage. She walked across the vineyard gravel as though she owned the place, perfume trailing behind her like a declaration of superiority. She kissed the air near my cheek and said, "Oh my, how rustic, very authentic, very you." Her eyes traveled over my simple navy dress, a modest choice from Nordstrom Rack, and she smiled in that way only she could, the kind of smile that cut. Then she revealed her surprise. She told the wedding coordinator she had a special speech planned for her niece. I watched the coordinator glance at me, unsure. My chest tightened, but I nodded anyway. It was not the time for a scene. Emma deserved a beautiful day. I swallowed my dread and prayed that Victoria would, for once, choose kindness. As the ceremony began, everything seemed perfect. The sun lit the rows of vines, the lavender filled the air, and Emma glowed as she walked down the aisle. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to believe that this day would not be poisoned. But in the pit of my stomach, I knew Victoria was waiting for her stage. At the reception, she took it. Tyler, the young MC, announced her as if she were the keynote speaker at a conference. "Please welcome Victoria Mitchell, Senior Marketing Director at Technova Industries." She rose gracefully, earrings sparkling, and began her toast. At first, it seemed harmless. She reminisced about my own wedding, about how I had once been so full of potential. But then her words sharpened, each syllable chosen to slice through my composure. She reminded everyone that I had an MBA, that the world had expected more from me, that I had chosen love over ambition. The room chilled. Emma's shoulders hunched, David's jaw tightened, and I, sitting at the head table, felt the familiar sting of 15 years of belittlement condensed into one spotlight moment. My sister had mastered the art of humiliation disguised as advice. She did not raise her voice. She did not curse. She simply spoke with the authority of someone who believed her success gave her the right to define mine. But what she never understood is that appearances can lie. A shiny title, a polished LinkedIn profile, an expensive dress, none of it could hide the cracks in her life. And the farm she mocked, the soil she sneered at, had quietly become something she could not even imagine. That day, I realized something important. Silence without boundaries is not dignity. It is surrender. And surrender was no longer an option, not with Emma watching. This was the beginning of a reckoning, 15 years in the making. I could see it in Emma's eyes before the ceremony even began. She wanted the day to be about love, joy, and family. But she also carried a shadow of fear. That fear was named Victoria. For as long as Emma could remember, her aunt had been the measuring stick she was told to reach for. Straight A's were never enough. Soccer trophies were dismissed. Even her acceptance to UC Davis's agricultural business program had been met with a cutting remark. Well, someone has to do the dirty work. Those words stuck like burrs in Emma's skin. I sat at the reception table, pretending to sip champagne, while my mind replayed the countless times my sister had tried to shrink me in front of others. I saw Emma watching, nervous, bracing herself. The memory of Christmas dinners where Victoria's children wrinkled their noses at Emma saying she smelled like farm haunted me. The silence from my parents, the awkward laughter from cousins, the way David would simply lower his head, it all returned like ghosts surrounding me that night. And yet, beneath that discomfort, there was also something new. David sat straighter than usual, his weathered hands resting calmly on the tablecloth. His eyes, the color of soil after rain, met mine with steady assurance. "Let it go," he whispered. "This is Emma's day." His words were gentle, but his grip on my hand told me something else. He was waiting. He had a plan I could not yet see. When Victoria's name was announced, 200 guests turned their heads. She rose like royalty, commanding the room without effort. Diamond earrings flashed under the chandeliers. Her voice, trained and confident, filled every corner. She started with sweet nostalgia, but quickly slid into poison. Rachel was so young when she married. Fresh out of Northwestern with her MBA. The world at her feet. We all had such high hopes. Every syllable was a scalpel. She painted me as a woman who had chosen mediocrity, as if love, land, and family were second-rate prizes for those who could not win the real game. And Emma sat there, her face draining of color, as if her very identity was being dismantled in front of her new husband's family. I wanted to rise. I wanted to shout, but I knew the risk. If I made a scene, I would look like the unstable sister, the bitter one who could not take a joke. Victoria had perfected plausible deniability. Every insult wrapped in velvet, every jab hidden under the guise of inspiration. In that moment, something stirred inside me. I thought about all the years I had chosen silence, all the times I had folded my MBA diploma and tucked it away instead of framing it. All the conferences I had spoken at, never mentioning them to family because I did not want to endure her mockery. I thought about Emma's therapy sessions, the tears she shed, because her own aunt had convinced her that being a farmer's daughter was something to hide. And then I thought about the truth. The contracts signed in quiet barns, the employees who depended on us for their livelihoods, the soil restored, the awards won, the quiet empire David had built with patience and persistence. Success that never needed to be announced, but was undeniable all the same. My heart pounded. I wanted to protect my daughter, to shield her from the shame my sister was trying to sow into her wedding day. But just as I gathered courage to stand, David squeezed my hand 3 times. Our old signal. Trust me. I did not yet know what he meant, but I held on to that signal like a lifeline. Before I go further, let me pause. Because if you are listening right now, maybe you know this feeling too. Maybe someone in your family has made you feel small, as if your choices were less valid, less glamorous, less worthy. If this story resonates with you, let me know where you are watching from and subscribe so you never miss stories that remind us our worth is not defined by someone else's expectations. Back at the head table, Tyler the MC was glancing nervously at his iPad. He looked toward the doors more than once, fidgeting. I saw David's faint smile, as though he was waiting for a guest only he knew was coming. Meanwhile, Victoria continued her performance, each phrase more biting than the last. I kept my head high. I would not break in front of her. Not tonight. Not with Emma's future hanging in the balance. This was not the time to fight back with words. This was the time to wait. Because David was right. Success speaks for itself. And when it arrived, it would speak louder than any toast my sister could ever give. The vineyard that afternoon looked like something out of a postcard. Rolling hills stretched toward Mount Hood, the air rich with lavender and the scent of ripe grapes. Rows of white chairs lined the lawn, and the barn stood ready for the reception, its beams draped with soft lights. Everything was perfect, until the crunch of tires on gravel cut through the air. Victoria's Tesla glided up the drive like a black arrow aimed at the heart of our peace. Out she stepped, wrapped in silk that shimmered in the sun, her heels clicking on the stones with deliberate rhythm. Robert trailed behind her, awkward in his tailored suit, his eyes downcast. She did not notice. She never did. She greeted me with an air kiss, perfume sharp enough to choke. "Oh my! How rustic," she said, her gaze sweeping across the barn. "Very authentic, very you." The words, delivered with honey, carried the sting of vinegar. I forced a smile. "Emma loves it here," I replied. "Of course she does, sweetie. She grew up with simple tastes." Her eyes drifted down to my dress, a navy blue gown I had bought on clearance. "Is that what you're wearing?" Before I could answer, she turned to the coordinator. "I need to speak with whoever is handling speeches. I have something special planned for my niece." She pulled a thick cream envelope from her purse, waving it with the theatrics of a magician about to perform. "This is part 1 of my gift. Part 2 comes during my toast." My chest tightened. Emma deserved a day without barbs. Yet here was Victoria, making herself the center of the story, as she always had. The coordinator looked at me questioningly. I nodded, though dread coiled in my stomach. Fighting her now would only create a bigger scene. As the guests arrived, she positioned herself at the entrance, a self-appointed greeter. "Yes, I flew in from San Francisco," she told Emma's college roommate. "Had to push back a board meeting. But family comes first, doesn't it?" When our neighbors, the Johnsons, walked up, she clasped their hands warmly. "Oh, you know Rachel from the farmer's market. How quaint. I keep telling her she could do so much more with that MBA, but some people prefer the simple life." I saw David stiffen, his jaw clenched, the tie Emma had gifted him trembling in his hands. Soil lines etched into his skin even after scrubbing were visible to anyone who cared to notice. "Let it go," I whispered. But I knew he was storing every word, every slight. Tyler, the young MC, hurried to me, flustered. "Mrs. Thompson, your sister insists on giving a special toast. She says she cleared it with you." I had not, but Victoria was already there, smiling as if the stage were hers. "Of course it's cleared. I'm the bride's only aunt. I've prepared something inspirational for Emma." She handed Tyler a card. "Make sure you introduce me properly. Victoria Mitchell, Senior Marketing Director at Technova Industries." I wanted to say no, I wanted to protect Emma. But with 200 guests finding their seats, my parents struggling to get my father settled with his cane, and the clock ticking toward the ceremony, I caved. "Fine," I whispered, "but keep it brief." She patted my shoulder condescendingly. "Don't worry, sister. I know exactly what needs to be said." Those words made my blood run cold. Later, as Emma walked down the aisle glowing in her gown, I tried to bury my fear under the joy of the moment. Marcus's eyes brimmed with tears. The lavender swayed in the breeze. Even Victoria dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief, playing the role of devoted aunt. But I knew her. The performance was only beginning. This day was supposed to belong to Emma. Yet the storm was already brewing, wrapped in silk and diamonds, waiting for the microphone. And I realized that sometimes the most dangerous threats to our peace are not strangers. They are family. This was the calm before the storm. The clinking of glasses and the gentle hum of voices filled the barn as guests settled in for the reception. Plates of farm-to-table dishes arrived. Everything Emma had dreamed of: heirloom tomatoes, roasted vegetables, freshly baked bread. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the day might escape unscathed. But then Tyler tapped the microphone, his voice echoing over the chatter. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we hear from the best man and maid of honor, the bride's aunt has requested to share some words. Please welcome Victoria Mitchell, Senior Marketing Director at Technova Industries." I closed my eyes. There it was. The introduction she had rehearsed in her head 100 times. Victoria rose with practiced grace, smoothing her dress so the diamond bracelets glinted under the lights. She stood at the head table, positioning herself perfectly beneath the spotlight. Her smile, sharp as glass, cut across the room. "Thank you, Tyler." At first, her tone was light. "Watching Emma today reminds me of watching her mother at her wedding 20 years ago." A few guests smiled politely. She continued. "Rachel was so young then, fresh out of Northwestern with her MBA. The world at her feet. We all had such high hopes." I felt the air shift. The words hung heavy, sugared with nostalgia but sharpened with judgment. David's hand tightened around mine under the table. My stomach twisted as I recognized the pattern. Her voice grew more pointed. "When Rachel told me she was marrying a farmer, I thought it was a phase. You know, some women go through that back-to-nature thing. But 20 years later, here she is, still persevering." Guests shifted uncomfortably. Marcus's parents exchanged looks, his mother raising a skeptical eyebrow. Victoria paused, letting the discomfort spread like wildfire before adding with false sweetness. "I just hope Emma remembers she doesn't have to limit herself. Just because her mother chose to step back from ambition doesn't mean she has to." The words sliced through Emma like a blade. I saw her shoulders slump, that defensive posture she had carried in high school when whispers of being just a farm girl had nearly broken her. Her new husband's hand squeezed hers in vain comfort. And still, Victoria smiled, basking in the hush she had created. She pulled the cream envelope from her purse and held it aloft. "Inside this is part 1 of my gift to Emma. Part 2 comes during my toast." She looked directly at me, her eyes glinting with challenge. The audience murmured, unsure whether to clap or cringe. I could see phones being raised discreetly, recording every word. To them, it was family drama unfolding like reality television. To me, it was 15 years of small cuts erupting into one grand wound. I wanted to stand, to stop her, to snatch the microphone away. But the voice in my head whispered, "If you fight her now, you will look unhinged. She will win again." David, calm as ever, leaned closer. "Patience," he whispered. "Success does not need to announce itself." But this time it felt different. This was not a family dinner where her words would fade into awkward silence. This was Emma's wedding, and the damage was being recorded, etched into memory forever. I thought of the nights Emma cried after family gatherings, the way she shrank whenever her aunt compared her to cousins who aimed higher. I thought of her therapy sessions, where she admitted she hated introducing herself as a farmer's daughter, because she feared people would laugh. Victoria was undoing years of healing with a single toast, and she knew it. Her voice softened, wrapping cruelty in velvet. "Emma, darling, you are young. You don't have to follow in your mother's footsteps. You don't have to settle for barns and farmers' markets. You can reach higher. You deserve more." The spotlight stayed on her, but every eye in the room shifted to Emma. The bride's face was pale, her mascara threatening to run. My heart broke, my fists clenched. This was the moment I realized silence was no longer an option. Because dignity without boundaries is nothing but surrender. And I had surrendered long enough. Emma's hands trembled in her lap as her aunt's words dripped into the microphone. Her carefully applied makeup could not hide the strain in her eyes. I recognized the look instantly. It was the same one she wore in high school when classmates whispered "farm girl" behind her back. Now, on her wedding day, in front of 200 people, the whispers had returned in the form of Victoria's voice. Marcus leaned in, whispering urgently to Emma, but she shook her head, frozen in place. Her posture curved inward, the protective stance of someone trying to disappear. I felt my heart splinter. This was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, yet here she was reliving old wounds, carved open by someone who claimed to love her. Across the table, Marcus's parents exchanged troubled glances. His mother, a federal judge who had presided over some of the toughest cases in Oregon, lifted an eyebrow. His father, a pediatric surgeon, set down his glass with deliberate force. They were not impressed by the spectacle. I could sense their silent question. What kind of family humiliates their own on such a day? David remained still, though his eyes flicked toward his phone, A faint smile played across his lips, but he said nothing. I knew that smile. It was the look of a man who had already prepared his move, who trusted that patience would be our weapon. Still, my instincts screamed at me to act. Almost time, he whispered, the words barely audible over the microphone. I wanted to ask him what he meant, but Victoria's voice drowned everything else out. She pressed on with her performance. Emma, sweetie, your mother chose love over success. That is sweet. But you don't have to make the same sacrifice. The word sacrifice hung heavy, like a slap across the room. Phones appeared in the crowd. Guests began recording, sensing the drama. To them, it might have felt like entertainment. To me, it was devastation. I could feel Emma's spirit folding under the weight of her aunt's judgment. I thought back to the times Emma had begged not to attend family holidays, to the nights she returned from gatherings in tears, questioning whether she was good enough, to the 2 years of therapy that helped her reclaim her pride in our life. And here it was, unraveling in minutes. Something inside me cracked. I could not sit idle as my daughter's self-worth was dismantled. But if I stood up now, Victoria would spin it as proof of my instability. She was an expert at that humiliate, then hide behind a mask of concern. I glanced toward David again. He gave me the signal, 3 squeezes of my hand. Trust me. That was when I noticed Tyler, the MC, fidgeting with his iPad. He kept glancing toward the barn doors, anxiety etched into his face. It was as if he were waiting for someone who had not yet arrived. Meanwhile, Victoria was building toward her climax. She lifted the envelope for all to see, her smile smug. Inside, this is a check, but more importantly, a letter of introduction to my CEO, because unlike some people, her gaze landed squarely on me. I believe in opening doors, not closing them. The words struck like a hammer. The guests shifted again, uneasy, the atmosphere taut as a stretched wire. Emma's hand flew to her face, trying to cover the tears. I could not allow this. I had to act, or Emma's wedding would forever be remembered not for love, but for humiliation. Before I go further, let me pause. Because if you were in my position, watching your child suffer at the hands of family, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments how you would have handled it. And if you believe no one deserves to be diminished on their wedding day, subscribe so these stories reach others who need strength. Back at the table, my chest heaved as if carrying 15 years of swallowed words. Victoria's voice was syrupy sweet, but her intentions were razor sharp. Every guest could feel it now. No longer subtle, no longer hidden. She was attempting to redefine Emma's future in front of everyone who mattered. And Emma, my precious daughter, deserved better. This was not just a toast. It was an attack. And I knew the counterstrike was coming. The barn seemed to shrink around me as Victoria's voice filled every corner. Her words carried that same polished cruelty she had used my entire adult life. But there was something different this time. David was not just enduring. He was waiting. I studied him as she spoke. His hands, etched with the permanent lines of soil, rested calmly on the table. He did not fidget. He did not flinch. Instead, he glanced at his phone once, then slid it back into his pocket with a faint, knowing smile. Almost time, he whispered again. Almost time for what? Across the room, Tyler shifted nervously, glancing toward the entrance like a soldier waiting for reinforcements. He whispered to the catering manager, then to the DJ. Something was brewing. I could feel it, like electricity in the air before a storm. Meanwhile, Victoria continued her performance, her smile practiced, her tone dripping with false concern. Emma, darling, remember that success is about reaching higher than your circumstances. Your mother chose to limit herself. You don't have to. Her words landed heavy. Emma's shoulders slumped further, and I saw the old fear flash across her face. She had spent 2 years in therapy fighting against this exact narrative, and here it was being resurrected in front of 200 witnesses. I clenched my fists under the table. My instinct was to rip the microphone from Victoria's hand and end the charade. But I hesitated. If I erupted, she would twist it, make me look unhinged, the unstable sister who couldn't handle constructive advice. I knew that playbook too well. David leaned closer, his voice steady. "Trust me," he murmured. His eyes, steady and certain, carried a message I couldn't ignore. I forced myself to inhale deeply, to steady the pounding in my chest. Patience, I told myself. If David had a plan, I needed to hold the line a little longer. Then I noticed something else. At table 3, David's family shifted in their seats. His brother adjusted his jacket, his sister leaned forward, and his 80-year-old mother gripped her cane with iron strength. They were not nervous, they were expectant. They too were waiting. What did they know that I did not? I turned back to Victoria, who was waving the cream envelope like a trophy. Inside is a check, and more importantly, a letter of introduction to my CEO. Because Emma deserves options, real options. She doesn't need to settle for farmers' markets and fruit stands. The condescension was so thick, it coated every syllable. Guests squirmed in their seats. Marcus's parents exchanged another look, his mother's disapproval clear. I could feel the humiliation building like a tidal wave, threatening to crash over us all. And yet, David remained composed. He raised his glass, soil-stained fingers steady, and sipped calmly, as though none of it touched him. That was when the thought hit me. Maybe he wanted this. Maybe he needed Victoria to play her hand fully, to expose herself in front of everyone before the truth stepped in. I looked at him again, searching his face. There it was, the same calm expression he wore during harvest season, when storms threatened the crops, the quiet confidence of a man who had seen storms before and knew they always passed. For the first time that evening I felt a flicker of hope. Victoria had spent 15 years painting us as less than. Tonight, she thought she was unveiling her grand finale. But what she didn't realize was that she had walked straight into David's stage, not hers. And I was finally ready to see what he had been preparing all along. The storm was about to break. The tension in the barn was palpable. Guests whispered among themselves, shifting in their seats as Victoria's words continued to sting like finely honed knives. Emma's hands clutched her bouquet tighter, her knuckles white, as though holding on could protect her from the verbal assault. David remained calm, his presence a quiet anchor amidst the storm. But I could see the anticipation in his eyes, the barely perceptible lift of his lips. He knew something I did not yet understand. Victoria raised the envelope again, gesturing toward the microphone. "Emma, you are young, full of potential, and your mother chose to step back from ambition. But you don't have to. You have the world at your feet. You can do so much more than live a simple life." Her voice was syrupy, deceptively sweet, but the subtext was unmistakable. A life of farming and simplicity was a failure, and Emma needed saving from it. I could see the effect immediately. Emma's shoulders slumped further. Her eyes darted toward Marcus, seeking reassurance, but his grip on her hand was gentle, almost tentative. She wanted to rise to the occasion, to assert her own identity, but the weight of 15 years of subtle disparagement pressed down on her. She had internalized the narrative that being a farmer's daughter was second-rate, that love and family were inferior to corporate success. Across the room, the guests shifted uncomfortably. Some phones were subtly raised, recording the unfolding drama. Others murmured quietly, sensing the tension, unsure of how to respond. Even the catering staff paused mid-service, sensing the electric energy in the room. The barn, once warm and celebratory, had become a theater of judgment. David's subtle smile gave me pause. He was not nervous. He was not panicking. He had orchestrated a plan long before this moment, a way to let the truth reveal itself without confrontation. He had spent years quietly building, letting the farm grow, cultivating sustainable practices, and creating partnerships that no one outside our circle understood. Tonight, those achievements would speak louder than Victoria's words ever could. Tyler, the MC, glanced repeatedly toward the barn doors. His movements were increasingly anxious, almost frantic. He was waiting for someone, a person whose arrival would shift the balance in the room entirely. The guests had no idea that the real drama was about to unfold not through sarcasm or condescension, but through undeniable, tangible success. Victoria's toast continued, her voice weaving praise and judgment in a seamless pattern. "I want Emma to see that success is about ambition, about striving for more than the ordinary. Her mother made choices that limited her potential. But you, Emma, have a future unbounded. You don't have to settle for simple work, for soil under your nails, or for a life that seems ordinary." Her gaze snapped to me at the last words, sharp and calculating, as if daring me to react. I remained still, breathing evenly, but my mind raced. Every insult she had ever made, every slight she had imposed, every moment of doubt she had seeded in Emma's life, all of it coalesced in this single act of public judgment. Yet beneath my rising anger, a different feeling emerged. Hope. David had given me the signal, the 3 gentle squeezes of his hand under the table. Patience. Wait. The arrival of someone else would render all of Victoria's grandstanding meaningless. Then I saw a small commotion at the barn entrance. Guests craned their necks. Tyler's face lit with relief, and David's eyes sparkled. The moment we had been waiting for was about to arrive. Victoria, oblivious to the incoming disruption, continued with her speech, unaware that her meticulously orchestrated display of superiority was about to collapse under the weight of reality. And in that instant, I understood exactly what David meant by success not needing to announce itself. Tonight, the truth would speak louder than any toast, any title, any designer dress. The stage was set. The reckoning was about to begin. The murmur of the guests grew quieter as the doors to the barn opened again. Every eye turned toward the entrance, the collective anticipation palpable. Victoria, unaware of the shift in the atmosphere, straightened her posture, holding the cream envelope like a trophy. She continued, her voice poised. "Emma, this is part 1 of your gift. Part 2 will follow during my toast." The words hung in the air, seemingly sweet, but laced with condescension. Suddenly, a ripple passed through the crowd. A group of men in crisp suits entered the barn, moving with authority that commanded attention. Among them was Mr. James Harrison, Vice President of Procurement for the Ritz-Carlton Hotel Group. His presence alone drew gasps from several guests. Phones rose, cameras focused, and whispers spread like wildfire. Tyler, the MC, looked flustered but relieved, gesturing for silence. David's calm demeanor remained, yet I noticed a subtle gleam in his eyes. He had orchestrated this. For months, he had been quietly negotiating partnerships, building credibility, and preparing for a moment exactly like this. Tonight the truth would be undeniable, and Victoria's pretense would crumble. Mr. Harrison stepped forward, clearing his throat, his authoritative presence filling the room. "We could not miss celebrating with the Thompson family," he began. "Thompson Organic Farms has just signed an exclusive contract with Ritz-Carlton Hotel Group for the Pacific Northwest properties." The words hit the room like thunder. The audience froze. Victoria's hands froze mid-gesture. The cream envelope fell unnoticed to the floor. I felt a surge of vindication, but it was tempered with awe at David's foresight. He had been underestimated for 15 years, mocked for working with soil and crops, yet here he stood, having built an empire from dedication, innovation, and integrity. His quiet patience now paid off in full, revealing a truth no amount of condescension could erase. Victoria's expression shifted from smugness to confusion, then to horror. Her carefully curated image was unraveling before 200 witnesses. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words formed. Her superiority, honed over years of cutting remarks, was powerless against tangible proof of success. Mr. Harrison continued, highlighting the exclusivity and prestige of the contract. "Your heirloom tomatoes, microgreens, and heritage carrots will be served in Ritz-Carlton properties, including 3 Michelin-starred restaurants in San Francisco, Seattle, and Vancouver." The room erupted with quiet awe as guests processed the scale and significance of the achievement. Victoria's company, despite all her boasts, had never landed such a partnership. I glanced at Emma. Her face shifted from anxiety to shock, then to pride. She squeezed Marcus's hand, finally able to stand tall in the presence of the very aunt who had attempted to diminish her. This was the moment Emma realized the depth and value of her roots, and that the family she had sometimes felt ashamed of was capable of extraordinary impact. David stood, his hands flat on the table, dirt-stained and honest. "The farm you disdain," he said, addressing Victoria indirectly, "employs 43 people year-round, funds Emma's college, and supports this entire wedding without touching a trust fund. Everything we have achieved is through hard work and integrity." The room went silent, as though holding its collective breath. Victoria's lips parted, but no words emerged. The veneer of superiority she had cultivated for years dissolved in the face of undeniable evidence. For the first time she was powerless. I felt a complex mix of emotions: relief, pride, and a deep sense of justice. 15 years of judgment and scorn had finally met the quiet patience and determination of truth. Tonight, my family's integrity, my husband's vision, and our shared values had not only protected Emma, but also revealed to everyone present that true success cannot be faked or belittled. At that moment, I understood something vital. Success does not need to shout. It does not need applause. It does not need validation from those who seek to undermine you. True success speaks for itself, and in front of 200 witnesses, it had spoken. The barn fell silent as all eyes turned toward David and me. Victoria, frozen with the cream envelope slipping from her fingers, seemed to have vanished into her own shock. The grandeur she had cultivated for years, the designer dress, the Tesla, the impeccable makeup, could not shield her now. The truth had arrived, embodied in the calm, steady presence of my husband and the visible acknowledgement from Mr. Harrison. Tyler, still holding the microphone, cleared his throat nervously. "Ladies and gentlemen, before we continue, I have one more announcement regarding Thompson Organic Farms," he said, his young voice cutting through the tension. Guests leaned forward, some shifting in their seats, curiosity piqued, phones were out, recordings were being made. The barn became an amphitheater, and Victoria's toast became a backdrop to something far more powerful. Mr. Harrison stepped forward again. "Thompson Organic Farms is the exclusive supplier for Ritz-Carlton's Pacific Northwest properties. Their heirloom tomatoes, microgreens, and heritage carrots are now featured in Michelin-starred restaurants in San Francisco, Seattle, and Vancouver. These products have 6-month waiting lists, and the farm employs 43 people full-time, sustaining not only their family but an entire community." His eyes locked on Victoria briefly, a subtle reminder that the reality of achievement cannot be argued away. I felt a surge of pride as David rose, his hands steady, his voice calm but firm. "The farm you see as simple," he said, addressing Victoria indirectly, "supports our employees, funds Emma's education, and even covered today's wedding entirely from its earnings. We do not rely on trust funds, nor do we need validation from anyone to measure our worth. What we have built is real." Victoria's face went pale. The envelope lay on the floor, forgotten. Her composure, honed over years of control and judgment, had been shattered in minutes. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. The room held its collective breath. Even the caterers stopped mid-motion, sensing the shift in power. Emma sat at the head table, stunned, but gradually her posture straightened. For years, she had internalized Victoria's criticisms, even questioning her own choices. Now, witnessing the tangible proof of our success, she could finally embrace her roots without shame. Marcus squeezed her hand, supportive and proud, as she lifted her chin and let a small, confident smile emerge. I could see the whispers spreading among the guests. My father, still recovering from hip surgery, looked on with quiet satisfaction. My mother's eyes glistened with tears, a mixture of pride and relief. They had witnessed my struggles, my husband's quiet perseverance, and now the recognition that we had created something meaningful, something that could not be diminished by judgment or condescension. Victoria finally found her voice, weak and faltering. I just wanted to help Emma, to give her opportunities." Her voice cracked, revealing desperation and the hollow nature of her prior confidence. But the damage was done. Her years of undermining, her subtle manipulations, and her attempts to impose a false hierarchy were laid bare before everyone. I realized in that moment how long we had all been complicit in tolerating her behavior. My silence, my parents' avoidance, even the polite nods of family friends, all had allowed her sense of superiority to grow unchecked. Yet here, at this pivotal moment, reality had intervened. I glanced at David. His eyes met mine, a silent affirmation. Patience and quiet diligence had brought the ultimate vindication. Success did not have to scream. It did not need a platform or a showy gesture. It only needed to exist, and when it did, it spoke louder than the sharpest tongue or the most calculated insult. The guests, slowly understanding the magnitude of what had just unfolded, began to murmur among themselves. Phones were recording, cameras clicked, and a sense of awe rippled through the room. Victoria's carefully constructed narrative had crumbled, replaced by undeniable truth, that the life we had built rooted in love, integrity, and hard work was of immense value, regardless of external validation. I exhaled, a mixture of relief and quiet triumph filling me. Emma, witnessing her family's perseverance and her father's understated power, was beginning to see herself and our heritage in a new light. This was not just about proving Victoria wrong. It was about affirming what had always been real. And in that moment, I knew the balance had shifted. Victoria's era of judgment was over. Victoria remained frozen, the cream envelope still lying on the barn floor, her hands trembling slightly. The confidence she had spent years cultivating dissolved in the face of reality. Every carefully constructed comment, every whispered criticism over the past 15 years, had led to this moment of public reckoning. For the first time, she was not in control. She had underestimated the quiet power of persistence, patience, and integrity. I watched Emma. Her eyes were wide, a mix of awe and relief washing over her. The tension she had carried for years, the shame imposed by Victoria's relentless comparisons, was lifting. For so long, Emma had hidden her passion for agriculture, fearing judgment from family, fearing she wasn't good enough. Now, with proof of our success displayed so vividly, she could finally embrace her choices without guilt. David stood slowly, allowing the weight of the moment to settle over the room. His voice, calm and unwavering, carried across the barn. Victoria, the farm you mock employs 43 people full-time. It supports Emma's education, funds this wedding, and sustains our community. It thrives because of dedication, not appearances. Each word struck like a measured blow, undeniable in its power. The guests, previously whispering, now turned fully attentive. Phones recorded every expression, every word, as the realization of what had been built on our land sank in. Forbes journalists, friends of the family, even David's elderly mother, all watched as the illusion of superiority Victoria clung to crumbled around her. Victoria tried to speak, faltering. I just wanted to give Emma opportunities. Her voice cracked, exposing the desperation beneath her composed exterior. But her words had lost all weight. They were drowned out by the undeniable truth. The farm, our choices, and our dedication had created something extraordinary. I could feel years of suppressed anger and frustration surge within me. The whispered insults, the public condescension, the subtle undermining, it all culminated in this moment. Yet I tempered my emotions with awareness. This was Emma's day, and her dignity mattered more than my desire for confrontation. Every movement, every word, had to protect her confidence and allow her to witness the victory without fear. As Mr. Harrison, the vice president from Ritz-Carlton, confirmed the exclusive partnership with Thompson Organic Farms, the room reacted with gasps and murmurs of admiration. The contract, worth $2,500,000 annually, was not only a testament to David's foresight, but also to the legitimacy of a life that had been unjustly dismissed. Victoria's corporate achievements suddenly seemed hollow in comparison. I looked around, noting the subtle expressions of approval and respect from guests who had once doubted us. Former classmates from Northwestern exchanged knowing glances, some nodding in recognition of the sustainable agriculture models I had developed and implemented. Every subtle dismissed accomplishment of the past 15 years now stood exposed as significant, impactful, and visionary. Emma's pride grew with every acknowledgement. She straightened, finally meeting her aunt's gaze. For the first time she did not shrink or attempt to minimize herself. Her presence, her confidence, and her smile radiated a quiet power. She had learned to honor her roots, her family, and her heritage, understanding that authenticity outweighed prestige. David's gaze met mine. No words were needed. The storm had passed, replaced by clarity and truth. Victoria's misjudgment, her need to control and belittle, had met its match in the combination of hard work, patience, and unwavering integrity. The narrative had been rewritten not by confrontation or dramatics, but by undeniable proof. I realized in that moment a profound truth. Success does not need to shout. It does not rely on appearances or recognition from others. True success is measured in impact, authenticity, and the ability to stand firmly in one's values, even when others attempt to diminish them. And tonight, for the first time in 15 years, Victoria experienced a lesson that could not be ignored. The barn, once filled with tension, now hummed with quiet respect, a subtle shift that signaled a new balance in our family. The guests were silent now, many still holding their phones, capturing every detail of the unfolding drama. Victoria stood frozen, her carefully curated aura of superiority stripped away in the span of minutes. Her designer dress, once a symbol of status, now seemed like armor that had failed her. The envelope, meant to assert control and impress, lay abandoned on the barn floor. For the first time in 15 years, she was powerless. I glanced at Emma. Her chest rose and fell steadily, no longer hunched in the defensive posture of years past. The shame and self-doubt that Victoria had sown were beginning to dissipate. I felt a wave of relief and pride. My daughter, finally, could stand tall and claim her own choices as valid, even in the face of the most subtle and persistent attacks. David, ever calm, remained seated at the table for a moment, then rose to address the room. His voice carried authority without aggression. The farm you see is simple. The soil you think beneath contempt has created not just a livelihood, but a legacy. 43 people are employed year-round. Emma's education is funded. Today's wedding was entirely supported by the farm's earnings. Every project, every harvest, every contract was executed with dedication and integrity, not with borrowed prestige. The guests shifted, murmuring in awe. Former classmates from Northwestern, the Forbes journalist, even the elderly members of the family, looked on with visible astonishment. The tangible evidence of our achievements had eclipsed the verbal barbs of a lifetime. Victoria's carefully constructed narrative of superiority had collapsed under the weight of undeniable truth. Victoria finally spoke, her voice weak and quivering. I just wanted to help Emma, to give her opportunities she deserves. Her words faltered, exposing the desperation and vulnerability beneath the facade she had maintained for years. But the audience no longer responded to her authority. They were now aligned with reality, recognizing the value of the life we had built. I could feel a mixture of emotions rising in me: vindication, relief, pride, and even empathy. 15 years of minor humiliations and public condescension had culminated in this moment, but the point was not merely revenge, it was the protection and affirmation of Emma's dignity. She deserved to see that integrity and perseverance outweighed polished appearances and hollow titles. Tyler, still holding the microphone, gestured subtly to Mr. Harrison. The Ritz-Carlton executive continued to highlight the significance of the contract. Heirloom tomatoes, microgreens, heritage carrots, supplied to 3 Michelin-starred restaurants, and across multiple properties in the Pacific Northwest. The farm's influence was profound, its impact undeniable. The room seemed to collectively exhale in recognition. David added quietly but firmly, "Success does not require pretense or condescension. It does not need to be flaunted. What matters is authenticity, impact, and dedication. That is what we have built here." His words, simple but resonant, echoed through the barn. Guests began to nod in quiet respect. The hushed whispers turned into murmurs of admiration. Emma lifted her head, finally allowing herself to fully take in the moment. She no longer seemed burdened by the weight of expectations or the fear of judgment. She understood that she had been raised with integrity, love, and the confidence to make her own choices. Her pride in her family and her roots radiated subtly but powerfully. I realized, in that instant, that 15 years of patience, quiet effort, and steadfast values had culminated in a lesson more profound than any public display of success could provide. Victoria's attempts to belittle, manipulate, or impress could no longer overshadow the truth. Authenticity and hard work always speak louder than titles, suits, or social image. For Emma, for the guests, for all who had doubted, tonight was a lesson. The quiet, consistent building of a life of value will ultimately prevail over empty gestures and superficial judgments. And for Victoria, it was the first opportunity to truly see the consequences of her actions and the limits of her control. The stage was set for reconciliation, but only on terms defined by honesty, accountability, and authentic effort. The atmosphere in the barn shifted completely. The murmurs of astonishment had settled into a quiet respect. Victoria's poised authority had crumbled, replaced by an exposed vulnerability she had never experienced before. The envelope remained forgotten on the floor, a symbol of a strategy that had failed spectacularly. Guests were still processing what had just unfolded. 200 eyes had witnessed 15 years of subtle contempt finally collide with undeniable truth. I watched Emma, whose posture now radiated quiet confidence. She had spent years internalizing her aunt's judgment, her pride diminished by whispers that being a farmer's daughter was somehow less important. Today, she was finally seeing the legacy we had built, and her sense of self began to restore itself in real time. She squeezed Marcus's hand tightly, not from fear, but from solidarity. David, calm as ever, leaned back in his chair, surveying the room with a serene authority. Victoria, the farm you dismiss employs 43 people full-time. It supports Emma's college, funds this wedding, and sustains our community. Everything we have accomplished was built on hard work and integrity, not borrowed prestige or social posturing, he said, his voice steady, commanding attention. Every word landed like a precise measure of justice. The guests were captivated. Phones were out, capturing this unfolding moment, but more than that, they were witnessing the undeniable reality of success, built on patience, diligence, and authenticity. Former classmates from Northwestern nodded in silent recognition, journalists scribbled notes, and even David's elderly mother, seated with cane in hand, looked on with approving eyes. Victoria's position of superiority could no longer exist in the light of these achievements. Victoria finally spoke, her voice trembling. I only wanted to give Emma opportunities. Her words were a mixture of pleading and defensive justification. The carefully maintained mask of control she had worn for years had cracked, revealing insecurity and desperation beneath. She had realized, too late, that the narrative she had so meticulously constructed was irrelevant in the face of truth. I felt a mixture of vindication and tempered satisfaction. This was not about revenge. This was about protecting Emma's dignity, affirming her choices, and demonstrating that true achievement does not require validation from the cynical or envious. The years of subtle undermining and condescension that Victoria had cultivated for her own ego were now powerless against the proof of our life's work. Then Tyler, the MC, moved toward the microphone, his gestures directing attention to Mr. Harrison. The Ritz-Carlton executive emphasized the scale of the contract. Thompson Organic Farms as an exclusive partner, supplying heirloom vegetables, microgreens, and heritage carrots to Michelin-starred properties. The magnitude of our accomplishments became undeniably clear to every guest present. The farm was more than a livelihood. It was a legacy, a testament to vision, dedication, and ethical labor. David added another layer of clarity. Success does not require pretense or self-aggrandizement. Authenticity, persistence, and impact define real achievement. What matters is not appearances or status, but the tangible results of honest work. Tonight, these results speak for themselves. The room absorbed every word. The subtle nods, whispered approvals, and astonished expressions conveyed the shift in perspective. Victoria's narrative of superiority was dismantled, replaced by the reality that true influence comes from hard work, integrity, and care for one's community, not image or title. I looked at Emma again, noticing her quiet pride. For the first time, she could fully embrace her roots without fear of judgment. The anxiety and shame that had shadowed her upbringing were fading, replaced by recognition and confidence. She understood, in this pivotal moment, that her choices, her heritage, and her family's efforts were invaluable and worthy of respect. The impact on the guests was profound. Everyone had witnessed a vivid lesson that persistence, diligence, and authenticity ultimately outshine judgment, superficial success, and condescension. It was a demonstration of values over appearances and substance over perception. Even Victoria's failure had a lesson embedded in it, an opportunity for her to reassess priorities, acknowledge past behaviors, and, if she chose, rebuild with honesty and humility. But the balance of authority had shifted irrevocably. Tonight, in the barn filled with 200 witnesses, the triumph of integrity, patience, and authentic success had been decisively demonstrated. After the dust of Victoria's failed performance settled, the barn carried a different energy. The audience, previously tense and uncertain, now shifted into admiration and respect. Phones lowered slightly, conversations hushed, and the focus turned to the reality that had just unfolded. The farm we had nurtured quietly for years had spoken louder than any words or display of wealth could. I watched Emma, finally relaxing. Her shoulders had straightened, and her face, once tense with anxiety, now glowed with pride. For years, Victoria's comments had forced her to doubt her identity, to feel embarrassed about her home and heritage. She had internalized the judgment, believing that being part of a farming family was somehow insufficient. But tonight, those insecurities melted away, replaced with clarity. Our family's work, our choices, and our values had profound worth. David remained calm, standing with understated confidence. His presence was a pillar, a quiet reassurance that everything he had built with his own hands and his vision was legitimate and powerful. He had prepared for this moment for months, allowing the truth to reveal itself with perfect timing. His eyes met mine, and I saw the subtle smile that had become our signal. Patience pays off. Then Tyler, the MC, subtly directed attention to Mr. Harrison, who once again addressed the guests. Thompson Organic Farms is now the exclusive supplier for Ritz-Carlton properties across the Pacific Northwest. Their heirloom vegetables, microgreens, and heritage crops are now served in Michelin-starred restaurants in San Francisco, Seattle, and Vancouver. These are products with 6-month waiting lists, reflecting the quality and dedication inherent in this operation. The room collectively absorbed the magnitude of the announcement. Whispers of astonishment circled the barn as guests began to understand that the farm, which Victoria had dismissed so many times, was more than just a livelihood. It was a thriving enterprise that created impact, sustenance, and recognition. The prestige Victoria clung to so desperately faded in comparison to the undeniable truth of what we had accomplished. Victoria, still standing near the head table, looked pale and unsteady. Her hands, once so assured, now trembled slightly. The cream envelope lay forgotten on the ground, a symbol of her failed attempt at control. Her years of condescension, manipulation, and subtle humiliation had collided with the undeniable proof of our success. She opened her mouth to speak, but her voice faltered, cracking as she attempted to justify herself. I could feel a rush of vindication, tempered by the need to protect Emma and the integrity of the moment. The focus had to remain on her and the lessons she would carry forward. This was not about public shaming. It was about the triumph of diligence, integrity, and authentic achievement over superficial appearances and hollow pride. David spoke again, addressing Victoria indirectly but clearly, his voice steady and resonant. The farm you have dismissed employs 43 people full-time. It funds Emma's education. It has allowed us to host this wedding without touching a trust fund. We have built something real, something sustainable, and something that positively impacts many lives. It requires hard work and dedication, not condescension or borrowed prestige. The audience's reaction shifted from awe to deep appreciation. Former classmates, friends, and family members nodded in understanding, recognizing the quiet power of genuine achievement. Emma's pride radiated subtly yet unmistakably, her confidence no longer tethered to Victoria's opinions or societal expectations. Victoria's attempts to assert superiority were completely neutralized by evidence. The barn, once a stage for her judgment, now became a testament to integrity, resilience, and real accomplishment. Every insult she had delivered over the years had been met with patience, and the culmination of our work, our truth spoke louder than any speech she could ever give. I realized that the most powerful form of victory is not loud or dramatic. It does not come from confrontation. It comes from building, persevering, and allowing the truth to reveal itself in its own time. Tonight, our quiet success had become undeniable proof. Emma and I exchanged a glance. In that moment, I knew she understood that our choices, our roots, and our values were more powerful than words or appearances. Victoria's narrative was broken, and the legacy we had built shone brighter than any facade. The room remained hushed, the weight of the truth settling like dust after a storm. Victoria's previous aura of dominance had disintegrated completely, replaced with visible vulnerability. Her carefully choreographed performance, meant to impress and belittle simultaneously, lay in ruins on the barn floor. The envelope she had wielded as a symbol of control now symbolized failure. I looked at Emma, her face radiant with a mixture of relief, pride, and astonishment. For years, she had carried the invisible burden of her aunt's criticisms, internalizing the message that being a farmer's daughter was somehow inadequate. Her posture, once slumped and defensive, was now upright, confident, and grounded. She had witnessed, firsthand, that dedication, integrity, and genuine achievement outweigh superficial judgments and hollow appearances. David stood beside me, calm yet commanding. His quiet confidence radiated to the room. Every guest could see the subtle but unmistakable strength he embodied. This was the man Victoria had dismissed for years because of soil under his fingernails. Yet here he was, commanding respect, his life's work laid bare for all to see, and Victoria's carefully cultivated image reduced to irrelevance. Mr. Harrison, the Ritz-Carlton executive, reiterated the significance of the exclusive contract. Thompson Organic Farms now supplies properties across the Pacific Northwest, including heirloom vegetables, microgreens, and heritage crops, served in Michelin-starred restaurants in San Francisco, Seattle, and Vancouver. The quality and consistency of this operation are unmatched, and it reflects a dedication to excellence, the audience murmured appreciatively. Phones documented the moment, but more importantly, people understood the magnitude of the farm's influence and reach. Victoria's composure faltered further. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught in her throat. The guests had seen too much, the evidence too clear. Her authority and her voice, which had once carried weight through manipulation and condescension, were powerless against the tangible, undeniable truth of our accomplishments. I could feel a mixture of vindication and tempered satisfaction within myself. This was not about revenge. It was about reclaiming dignity, affirming Emma's choices, and demonstrating that a life built on authenticity and hard work cannot be diminished by envy or superficial critique. All the subtle undermining and judgment Victoria had levied over the years were rendered meaningless. David then addressed Victoria directly, his tone calm but firm. The farm you see as simple has provided for 43 employees year-round. It funds our daughter's college. It has supported this wedding completely from its own earnings. We have built something real. Everything we do is rooted in integrity, hard work, and dedication. Not borrowed status or empty appearances. The room absorbed his words, the audience collectively acknowledging the power of truth. Former colleagues, family, and friends recognized the stark contrast between fabricated superiority and real accomplishment. Emma's confidence grew with every word. She could finally see herself, her family, and her heritage as worthy, valuable, and strong. Victoria's attempts to regain control faltered further. She looked at the guests, searching for validation, but found only recognition of our success and respect for the work we had achieved over years of dedication. Her gestures and words no longer carried weight. The truth had neutralized every ounce of pretense. At that moment, I realized the profound lesson of patience and perseverance. True success does not rely on loud declarations, dramatic gestures, or superficial appearances. It emerges quietly through integrity, diligence, and consistent effort, and when the time is right, it speaks for itself, more convincingly than any argument, insult, or criticism ever could. I glanced at Emma once more. She had absorbed the lesson, seeing that pride in her roots, choices, and family could withstand scrutiny. Victoria's narrative had crumbled, and the legacy we had built shone brighter than any facade of superiority. Tonight, the balance of respect had shifted. For the first time, Victoria experienced the consequences of her years of judgment. And Emma, witnessing the power of truth and perseverance, learned that dignity, integrity, and authenticity are far more enduring than any appearance or accolade. The atmosphere in the barn had shifted completely. Guests, previously tense and uneasy, were now filled with admiration and respect. Phones were lowered, whispers softened, and all eyes were on the tangible proof of the life we had quietly built. The farm, our work, and our integrity spoke louder than any designer dress, Tesla, or carefully rehearsed speech ever could. Victoria's aura of dominance was gone, replaced by exposed vulnerability. The envelope she had wielded as a symbol of authority lay forgotten on the floor, a relic of a failed attempt to control the narrative. I looked at Emma. She was radiant now, no longer hunched with self-doubt. Her eyes, wide with awe and pride, met mine briefly. For years, she had internalized Victoria's criticisms, often questioning her choices, even hiding her passion for agriculture out of fear of judgment. Tonight, she could finally embrace her roots, her family, and her heritage with confidence. She understood that our achievements, though silent and humble compared to superficial status, were significant and worthy of recognition. David stood beside me, calm and composed, yet every inch radiated quiet authority. This was the man Victoria had belittled for years because of soil-stained hands and the life he built on the farm. Yet here he stood, validated by contracts, partnerships, and the undeniable proof of our success. Mr. Harrison, the Ritz-Carlton executive, confirmed the scale and significance of the exclusive contract with Thompson Organic Farms, emphasizing its prestige and impact. The audience, now fully attentive, absorbed the reality of our accomplishments. Victoria's face was pale. Her carefully maintained poise, the veneer of superiority she had perfected over years, had shattered. She opened her mouth, attempting an explanation, but the words failed her. The guests had witnessed the truth. The life she mocked, the work she dismissed, and the values she scorned had created real, measurable, and respected success. She was powerless. I could feel a wave of satisfaction, but it was tempered by care for Emma. This day was about her, not revenge. The goal was never to humiliate Victoria. It was to protect my daughter, to affirm her choices, and to show that integrity and authentic effort cannot be diminished by envy or superficial critique. 15 years of subtle undermining, condescension, and small humiliations had culminated in this moment, yet the focus remained on the positive, the triumph of authenticity and perseverance. David addressed Victoria calmly but firmly. The farm you dismiss employs 43 people full-time. It funds Emma's education. It sustains this wedding entirely from its earnings. Everything we have built is rooted in hard work, honesty, and dedication, not borrowed prestige or appearances. The clarity and authority of his words resonated through the barn. The audience absorbed the message. Former classmates, family friends, and guests nodded in acknowledgement. Emma's confidence swelled as she witnessed her family's integrity validated in real time. The lesson was evident. Dedication, patience, and genuine impact speak louder than any appearance, title, or social position. Victoria attempted to recover, but her voice faltered. The guests no longer paid her any attention, the evidence was irrefutable. Her attempts to assert superiority, once subtle and pervasive, were now powerless. The balance of respect had shifted irrevocably. I glanced at Emma again, feeling a surge of pride. She understood that success is not measured by external validation but by authenticity, resilience, and meaningful impact. Victoria's narrative had collapsed, and the legacy we had built shone brightly, undeniable, and respected by all present. At that moment, I realized the most important lesson. True strength lies in perseverance, integrity, and patience. When these are combined with quiet diligence, success becomes undeniable. And sometimes, the most powerful response to judgment is simply living well, letting truth stand tall without apology or explanation. The barn, once a stage for humiliation, had become a testament to authenticity, resilience, and genuine achievement. For Victoria, it was a lesson in humility and accountability. For Emma, it was a revelation about pride, roots, and the power of real success. And for me, it was a moment of affirmation. Living authentically, nurturing what matters, and standing firm in one's values can create triumphs that words alone cannot describe. After the wedding, a calm settled over the farm that had been absent for years. The sun dipped behind the vineyard hills, casting a warm glow over the rows of grapevines, and for the first time, I allowed myself to breathe deeply. Emma walked beside me, her hand slipping into mine, no longer burdened by fear or shame. She had seen her roots transformed into something extraordinary, and she understood the strength and value of authenticity. David returned to his work quietly, as always, hands in the soil, tending to the land he had nurtured for decades. I watched him and marveled at the quiet power he had built, the life we had constructed together from love, integrity, and relentless perseverance. This farm, this life, was more than a livelihood, it was a legacy. It sustained families, educated our children, and now inspired countless others who witnessed our story. Victoria did not return immediately, and that was okay. Some wounds require time and distance to heal. The lesson had been delivered not through anger, but through the unshakable proof of what patience, diligence, and authenticity can accomplish. Real growth comes from living in alignment with one's values, not chasing superficial validation. Emma and I walked through the barn doors into the golden evening light, her eyes bright with clarity. She asked questions about the crops, the soil, and the business we had built quietly but effectively. Her curiosity was genuine, and for the first time, she could embrace her heritage without reservation. I realized that love sometimes requires setting boundaries, teaching courage, and allowing truth to speak louder than words. 2 weeks later, Victoria called, humbled, seeking guidance rather than judgment. We offered her help in a way that promoted accountability, teaching her to rebuild honestly, without shortcuts. It was a reminder that respect cannot be demanded, it must be earned. Standing among the fields, Emma by my side, I felt a profound peace. The farm continued to thrive, our work impacting lives, and our family growing stronger in understanding and resilience. Success, I realized, is not about proving others wrong. It is about building a life of purpose, depth, and authenticity. And sometimes, the universe provides a moment of perfect clarity, where truth stands unchallenged and dignity prevails. In that stillness, I understood the ultimate lesson. Choose love, choose authenticity, and build something meaningful. Others may doubt, criticize, or belittle, but your roots, your values, and your perseverance will always speak for themselves.